Hi, my name is Monica Blake. I'm 38 years old and I've learned to smile through a lot more than I ever should have. I wasn't raised to stir the pot, to speak out when something felt wrong, or to make anyone uncomfortable, especially not family. But something happened that made me question every silence I ever kept. It started on a Sunday evening, during what was supposed to be a warm, celebratory dinner at my husband's family estate. His grandmother, Evelyn, had just turned 80, and the entire family had gathered to honor her. The matriarch, the one everyone tiptoed around but praised like a saint. I'd always had a complicated relationship with Evelyn. She was never cruel to my face, just perfectly measured in her indifference. I remember the first time she held Lily, my daughter. Lily was barely a few weeks old, wrapped in a soft pink blanket I'd spent days knitting myself. Evelyn looked down at her, tilted her head, and said, "She doesn't look like a Blake," then handed her back and walked away. That was the beginning. The years that followed were dotted with similar moments, small, subtle slights disguised as jokes or offhand comments. Sometimes it was the way gifts never had Lily's name on them. Sometimes it was how photos of the grandchildren hung on her hallway wall, and Lily's was always either missing or placed behind a door where no one would see it unless they were looking. I told myself it wasn't worth making a scene. I told myself it didn't matter. But kids notice more than we think, and Lily, she noticed. Still, she smiled, always. She's 11 now, smart, sensitive, the kind of girl who writes thank you cards without being told and remembers the names of waitresses. She's the best part of me, and the most vulnerable, especially around people who act like love is something to be earned. That night, the whole family was there. The table stretched across the candlelit room like something out of a catalog. Dozens of plates, polished crystal glasses, soft piano music playing from hidden speakers in the ceiling. My husband, James, had been quiet all day. He always went a bit still around his family. His father was a man of few words and too much pressure. His mother, Susan, had a voice like glass, pretty and sharp. James knew how to survive in their world, and sometimes that meant retreating. I'd grown used to that too. When we arrived, Evelyn greeted us with a nod. She kissed Lily on the forehead like she was greeting a stranger, not her only great-grandchild from James's side. Lily smiled anyway. She always does. I should have known something was off the moment I saw the place settings. Every plate had a small velvet box beside it. The kids, all 12 of them, buzzed with excitement. Some had gift bags, some had little wrapped presents with bows. The youngest ones had toys, puzzles, even personalized music boxes that played melodies Evelyn claimed were chosen just for them. Everyone was laughing, opening their gifts, passing them around the table to show off what they'd received. Everyone, except Lily. Her plate was bare. No box, no bow, not even a card. I felt it like a stone in my throat. I looked at James. He was watching Evelyn with this unreadable expression, his jaw tight, his hand clenched around his wine glass. And Lily, God, Lily just looked down at her hands and said, "It's okay, Mom." Maybe she forgot. She said it so quietly, like she was comforting me, like she didn't want me to be upset for her. That's the moment something snapped in me. Because no, she didn't forget. Evelyn never forgot anything. She remembered everyone's birthdays, everyone's allergies, who liked white wine, and who didn't eat gluten. She didn't forget my daughter. She ignored her, deliberately. And everyone at that table either didn't notice or pretended not to. That's when James stood up. He reached beneath the table into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. He placed it gently in front of Lily's plate. This, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, was supposed to be opened last. The room went quiet. You could hear the fire crackling in the hearth, the subtle scrape of someone setting down a fork. Lily picked up the envelope and looked at me. I nodded. She opened it carefully. Inside was a single card. She read it silently at first. Then she blinked and read it again, and then, in a voice as clear and steady as I've ever heard from her, she read it aloud, word for word. I'll never forget what it said, and neither will anyone else who sat at that table. Because after all those years of silence, someone finally said the one thing they were never supposed to say, and it came from my daughter. She held the card in her little hands like it weighed 100 pounds. Her voice didn't shake, not once. She just looked up, glanced at James, her father, and then began to read aloud while every eye at that long gleaming table turned toward her. "Dear Lily," she said, and the room shifted. Just that, just those two words, and suddenly it wasn't just a child's voice anymore. It was something deeper, I'm sorry for how you've been treated in this family. I'm sorry for the gifts you didn't receive, the photos you weren't in, and the hugs that stopped too soon. I'm sorry that the people who should have loved you the loudest only ever whispered your name, or didn't say it at all. But I want you to know something. None of that is your fault. You are enough, just as you are." She paused. No one breathed. Her eyes scanned the next few lines, and I could see her lip twitch just slightly, but she kept going. "When you were born, I wasn't strong enough to speak up. I didn't know how to fight for you in rooms that looked like they already had a winner. But I'm not quiet anymore. And neither should you be. You're not invisible, Lily, you're not small. And starting today, you'll never be left out again." She looked up, just for a second, long enough to meet her grandmother's gaze. Evelyn was frozen, her smile gone, her teacup midway to her lips. And then Lily read the last part. "P.S. This isn't just a card. It's a promise. Open the second envelope." James reached into his jacket again and pulled out a thinner envelope. He handed it to her. Lily opened it slowly, and inside was a single sheet of paper and a key. James leaned over and read it with her, then turned it to face Evelyn. "This," he said, his voice calm but sharp enough to slice, "is a deed. Signed and notarized. It's a trust fund I set up for Lily, using a portion of the inheritance I was supposed to receive from this family. She'll never need another birthday gift from this table again." The room exploded. Not with noise, but with silence so full it pressed against the windows. Evelyn's eyes narrowed, and I swear in that moment, she looked like she wanted to reach across the table and snatch the paper out of Lily's hands. But she didn't. She just set down her teacup, folded her hands, and said nothing. But her daughter, James's mother, wasn't as restrained. "James," she snapped, "what are you doing? You can't just—" "I already did," he interrupted. "Years ago. I just waited for the right moment to let you all know." And then he sat down calmly as if nothing had happened. Lily looked at me. She didn't smile. She just leaned into my side and let out the softest exhale, the kind kids make when they've been holding something in for way too long. I kissed her forehead. My hands were shaking. But I was proud. I was so proud. And I was angry. Not the loud, screaming kind of anger. The slow burning kind, the kind that remembers. Because this wasn't the first time, it was just the most public. For years, I watched that family decide who counted, who deserved to belong. And Lily, she never made the cut. I kept telling myself it wasn't worth fighting over, that keeping the peace mattered more. That if I just stayed polite, stayed small, they'd eventually see her, they'd eventually love her. But I was wrong. You don't wait for people like that to give your child worth. You take it back. You show them they never had the power in the first place. After dinner, people scattered. Some avoided eye contact. Some mumbled awkward goodbyes. One of the aunts pulled me aside and said, "You didn't have to humiliate her like that." I looked at her, this woman who had smiled through every exclusion, and I said, "We didn't humiliate her. She just finally saw herself in the mirror." Then I walked away. I didn't wait for a response, because honestly, I'd waited long enough. That was the night something shifted, not just for Lily, but for me. I wasn't done yet, not by a long shot, because if they thought a trust fund and a card were the only truths I was holding, they clearly hadn't been paying attention all these years. The drive home was quiet at first. James kept one hand on the wheel and one on Lily's knee, his thumb gently tracing circles through her jeans. She stared out the window, still holding the card like it was the most fragile thing she owned. I watched her in the mirror. Her face wasn't angry or sad. It was something else, something I didn't have a word for at the time, but now I know. It was recognition. Not of them, not of the family we left behind at that long polished table, but of herself. For the first time, she saw her own worth reflected back without conditions. And the power of that, it rattled me. I had spent so long shrinking myself for that family, laughing at the wrong jokes, changing outfits to blend in, rehearsing conversations before we arrived, coaching Lily on how to say thank you even when there was nothing to thank them for. I did all that in the name of unity. And what did it ever bring us? A chair with no gift. A name left off the list. A smile that never reached their eyes. I had been complicit in it, I see that now. Not in cruelty, but in compliance. In waiting too long to speak, in softening my daughter's heart every time it was bruised, when I should have been teaching her how to shield it instead. That night, after Lily went to bed, the card tucked into the side of her mirror like a small flag planted on new ground, James came to find me in the kitchen. He didn't say anything right away. He just stood there, his tie loosened, the top button of his shirt undone, watching me scrub the same wine glass for the third time. "You did good," I said, still facing the sink. He stepped closer, resting his palm flat on the counter beside mine. "You did better," he replied. "That card, the words. They were yours, weren't they?" I nodded. "Mostly, you helped. You wrote it. She deserved to hear it. He paused. So did you, and that broke me a little. Because I think deep down, I had written it for both of us. For every time I'd felt small at that table. For every moment I swallowed a reaction just to keep the night smooth. For every memory I watched James put in a box and label, not worth a fight. We'd been surviving his family. Lily was the one who finally stood up. And all she had to do was read. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the edge of my bed with the lights off, phone in hand, staring at my inbox. I had drafts I'd never sent. Messages to Susan, my mother-in-law, where I started to speak my mind and then deleted everything for fear of being labeled ungrateful or dramatic. I had one I wrote after Lily's 8th birthday when Evelyn gave crystal bracelets to all the girls and handed Lily a coloring book meant for toddlers. That night Lily cried in the back seat, quietly, like she didn't want us to hear. I typed a message to Evelyn that started with "Do you realize what you're doing?" and ended with nothing. I never sent it, but it was still there. That night, I sent it. And I didn't edit it. I didn't soften it. I didn't frame it as a question. I told her what she had done. I told her what it felt like to watch my daughter sit in a room full of family and feel like a visitor. I told her that love isn't something a child should audition for. And I ended it with a sentence that had been building in me for years. You don't have to pretend anymore. We know where we stand now. And you're the one who put us here. I hit send. I didn't wait for a reply. She didn't write back, but someone else did, her lawyer, a week later. He reached out to James, told him there were some concerns about the structure of the trust, that conversations had been sparked within the family and that it might be worth revisiting the terms. James forwarded me the email. I stared at it for a long time before responding. We're not revisiting anything. We're just getting started. I meant it, because what Evelyn and the rest of them couldn't understand, was that this wasn't about money. It wasn't even about the gifts. It was about finally refusing to beg for a seat at a table we'd been quietly asked to disappear from. I had kept a drawer full of silence for years, and now that it was open, I didn't plan on closing it again, not for them, not ever. ChatGPT Skazel. The email from the lawyer wasn't just a warning, it was a signal, a white-gloved slap across the face disguised as concern. It said everything without saying much at all. The Blake family had always operated like that. Polished, polite, and absolutely suffocating. They'd never scream at you across a room, they'd just send a carefully worded message that let you know exactly how far you'd stepped out of line. I showed the email to James again that night while he was brushing his teeth. He glanced at the screen, rinsed his mouth, and muttered, "They're rattled." That was his whole reaction, 2 words, but they meant more than anything I'd heard from him before. Because James wasn't just a husband that night. He was a man who'd finally chosen a side, and it wasn't theirs. A week passed, then 2. Lily was back to her usual rhythm. School, piano, late-night drawings left on the kitchen table for me to find in the morning, but I noticed small changes. She stood a little taller when she walked into a room. She didn't look down when someone said her name. It's strange how a child can carry so much weight without ever letting you see the full shape of it. And how, the moment it lifts, you realize how heavy it really was. The 3rd week after Evelyn's dinner, we got the invitation. Thick cardstock, silver embossed lettering, the kind of stationery you'd expect for a royal christening. It was for a family reconciliation luncheon hosted at Evelyn's estate. The message was clear. Come back, be polite, smooth it all over. Pretend none of it happened. There was a handwritten note from Susan attached. Let's not let one awkward evening ruin years of family memories. We all love Lily. We just want things to go back to normal. Normal, that word burned, because normal was where Lily got nothing. Normal was silence and side eyes and chairs that stayed empty. Normal was a trap. I held the card for a long time. James watched me, waiting. "We don't have to go," he said. "We can just ignore it." But I didn't want to ignore it. I was tired of ignoring. I wanted to walk into that house, into that shining glass box of performance and legacy and passive-aggressive smiles, and speak, really speak. Not for them, for her, for Lily. "We'll go," I said, "but we're bringing the truth with us." So we went. Sunday at noon, like the card said. Lily wore her navy dress, the one with the lace collar and the tiny bow in the back. I let her braid my hair that morning while I did hers, and she asked, "Do I have to talk?" I kissed her forehead. "Only if you want to." The estate was exactly how we left it. Pristine, perfectly trimmed hedges, windows so clear they didn't look real. A line of luxury cars stretched along the drive. Everyone was already there. I could feel it the second we stepped into the foyer. The weight of their stares. They looked at us like we'd walked in, dragging blood on our heels. Evelyn stood by the fireplace, dressed in beige, pearls perfectly aligned on her throat, sipping tea like the queen of a kingdom built on quiet rejection. She didn't move to greet us, neither did Susan. We were the last to arrive and the least expected. There were murmurs, hushed whispers. Someone, probably Aunt Teresa, let out a dramatic sigh as we passed. The table was set again, smaller this time, more intimate. 11 chairs, only 10 filled. The 11th was Lily's, empty, but beside it this time was a box, small, pink, wrapped in silver ribbon. The moment I saw it, something inside me twisted. It was bait, a peace offering wrapped in guilt. I glanced at Lily. She saw it too. She didn't move toward the chair. Instead, she looked at me and said loud enough for the room to hear, "I don't want it." The silence was instant. I felt it sink into the walls. Susan stood, hands folded tightly in front of her, eyes darting between her son and her granddaughter. "Sweetheart," she said, smiling too hard, "it's just a little gift, a token to say we're sorry. You should open it." Lily didn't blink. I already got my gift from my dad. And from my mom. James took her hand. I stepped forward, my heart pounding but steady. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. She doesn't need your token. What she needed was to be seen, and you failed at that. All of you. Evelyn set her cup down, slow and deliberate. "That's quite an accusation," she said. "No," I replied, "it's a fact." I pulled a folded sheet from my purse. James had seen me write it the night before. He'd asked if it was necessary. I told him yes. I opened it and began to read. One sentence at a time while the room held its breath. "This family has spent years deciding who belongs. You smile in photos but crop people out with your silence. You give gifts to be remembered and withhold them to punish. You taught Lily what exclusion feels like before she even learned how to spell it." My voice didn't shake, but she remembers now. And so do I, so this lunch, this card, this box, they don't fix anything. You don't get to unwrite her childhood with ribbon. I folded the paper and placed it on the table. "We're leaving, and we won't be back." James nodded. Lily squeezed my hand. We turned and walked out, past the crystal, past the portrait-lined halls, past the silence that had finally lost its grip. And in that moment, for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small in that house. I felt like we'd just burned down something poisonous and stepped into the air, ChatGPT scazel. We didn't look back as we walked out that day, not once. Not even when I heard the soft scrape of someone standing up quickly behind us or the faint clatter of silverware hitting china. I kept my eyes on the door, on the light spilling through the tall windows like it had been waiting for us. The air outside felt different, lighter somehow. Like we had been holding our breath for years and finally remembered how to exhale. We got in the car, James started the engine, and Lily leaned her head against the window, her breath fogging up the glass. "Are they going to be mad forever?" she asked. I reached back and brushed her hair off her cheek. "Probably," I said honestly. "But that's not our problem anymore." That night, we made spaghetti, nothing fancy. Just the three of us at the kitchen table, no linen napkins, no polished silver, no piano music coming through invisible speakers. Just laughter, clinking forks, and Lily telling us about the poem she was writing for English class. I remember thinking, this is what a family feels like. Not the cold choreography of those big luncheons, not the hushed whispers behind fine china, just love. Unearned, unconditional. Real, but of course they didn't let us go quietly. A week later, I got another letter, not an email. A real letter, thick envelope, fancy handwriting. It was from Evelyn, no apology, no softness, just a statement. She was adjusting certain aspects of the family trust and felt it was important to ensure future distributions reflect values of unity and mutual respect. I read that last part 3 times, then once more out loud, just to feel how hollow it was. I knew what it meant. She was cutting James out. She couldn't touch Lily's fun, that had been locked, airtight, with its own lawyers, but she was drawing her line in the sand. Punishment dressed in dignity. I showed it to James. He read it in silence, then slid it across the table like it was junk mail. "Let her," he said, and that was it. He didn't flinch, didn't second guess, didn't even seem surprised. That's when I knew something had changed in him too, not just a protective instinct, a release. Like he had finally stopped reaching back toward people who never once reached for him. And once that door closed, we didn't just move on, we rebuilt. James took a leave from the firm and started consulting on his own terms. I finally launched the design business I'd been sketching in secret for years. And Lily thrived. Her teacher pulled me aside one afternoon and said, "She's different this semester, braver. Like she knows who she is." I smiled and said, "She's just getting started." But the world doesn't like when you change the rules, especially not when you were supposed to keep playing your role. And one afternoon, 2 months after we left that dining room behind, I got a call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail at first. Then curiosity got the better of me. I played it back. It was Susan. Her voice was clipped, like she was choosing every word under threat of a lawsuit. "Monica, I need to speak with you. It's about Evelyn. Please call me back." That was it. No hi, no warmth. Just 10 seconds of carefully packed tension. I stared at my phone, heart strangely calm. I didn't call back, not right away. I waited. Because I already knew. People like Evelyn don't call meetings unless the image is cracking. And I had a feeling, no, a certainty, that something behind those velvet curtains was about to fall apart. And if they thought I was going to help stitch it back together, they clearly hadn't been paying attention. Not then, not now. ChatGPT Skazel. The second voicemail came 2 days later. This time Susan sounded less clipped, more frantic, like someone trying not to cry in a public bathroom. "Monica, please. I understand you don't owe us anything, but things have changed. I'd like to talk. Not about the past, about what's happening now, no specifics. Just that tremble in her voice, that carefully suppressed urgency." I didn't reply to that one either, not because I didn't care what had changed, but because for once, I wanted them to sit in it. In the silence they'd so freely handed me all these years. In the empty space where Lily's birthday card should have been. In the pause after the family photo was taken without us. In the ache of absence. Let them taste what it feels like when you reach out and no one reaches back. But on the 5th day, James got a message from his cousin Daniel. "Have you heard? Evelyn collapsed. Hospitalized. Something with her heart." That was it. No flowers of language, no manipulation. Just fact. James didn't say much when he read it. He stared at the screen, then quietly got up, went outside, and sat on the porch steps. I gave him space. I always did when it came to them. A part of him would always carry the weight of being the disappointment, the son who drifted from the script. And now, with the queen of that kingdom in a hospital bed, I knew the old guilt was stirring. After a while, he came back in and said, "I'm going to visit her. I'm not going for them. I'm going for closure." I nodded. I didn't ask to go with him. He needed to do that part alone. But before he left, I pulled a card from the kitchen drawer. Not fancy, just plain ivory. I wrote something, sealed it, and handed it to him. "Give her this, if it feels right." He looked at it, hesitated, then tucked it into his jacket. The next time I saw him was 6 hours later. His face was pale, quiet, but not broken, just still. I asked how it went. He sat down slowly and said she was awake, hooked up to monitors, still sharp. "Did you talk?" He nodded. "We talked. She said she didn't expect me, said it was brave to come. Then she asked if I brought Lily. That surprised me. I told her no," he continued, "because Lily doesn't visit strangers." That caught me off guard. I stared at him, and he looked up at me with the most steady expression I'd ever seen on his face. She got quiet after that. Didn't argue, just nodded. "Did you give her the card?" He reached into his jacket, pulled out the envelope, and set it on the counter. "No," he said. "Didn't feel right. But I read it to her." My chest tightened. And she listened, said nothing for a long time. Then she said, "I didn't think anyone would actually remember all that." And I told her, "We didn't forget. We forgave. That's different." That's when I knew it was over. Not her life, not yet, but her grip on us, on James, on whatever spell had kept us all trying so hard to be good enough for someone who counted love in favors and favors in obedience. That night, we had dinner like usual. Lily told us she'd been chosen to read a poem at the school assembly. It was the same poem she'd been working on that week after the dinner. She asked if she could practice it aloud. We said of course. She stood in the middle of the kitchen, barefoot, her hair messy from the day, and read it with both hands holding the paper too tight. A family is not a table or a name or a room full of people who never learned how to listen. A family is the space between the silence. The look that tells you, "I see you. I choose you," still. I don't remember breathing for the next few seconds. When she finished, James reached for her. I couldn't speak. I just held her, because in that moment I realized something important. The story wasn't about them anymore. It was about us, what we'd built, what we'd protected, and the legacy we were choosing to hand down, not in silver or heirlooms or trust funds, but in truth. Because love, real love, doesn't forget. And it sure as hell doesn't leave an empty plate. The news came 2 weeks later. Evelyn had passed in her sleep. Peacefully, they said. James read the email twice, then closed the laptop and didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The weight in the room shifted, like a door closing without a sound. There wasn't grief, not in the traditional sense. There was a pause, a deep, long pause that carried all the years of silence, control, glances across long tables, decisions made in locked rooms, and the cold kind of love that expects you to prove yourself worthy of a seat. The funeral was scheduled for Friday, private and family only. Susan made sure to specify that when she reached out. We know things have been complicated, she said, her voice trying so hard to sound soft over the phone, but we'd still like you and Lily to come. It's important for closure. I almost laughed. Closure. That word they toss around like it's an apology, as if gathering in a stiff row of black chairs, listening to someone read a curated version of a life, would somehow smooth the scars underneath. I handed the phone to James. I didn't need to answer. He listened, then simply said, "We'll let you know," and hung up. We didn't go. Instead, that Friday morning, we drove to a small beach Lily loved. Just the three of us. No black, no flowers, no rehearsed lines. We picked up takeout on the way, fries and milkshakes and too many napkins, and sat on a blanket while the tide rolled in slowly like it had nowhere better to be. Lily drew hearts in the sand with a stick, then let the water wash them away. I asked her gently, "Do you want to talk about her?" She shook her head. "Not really. That's okay," I said. She leaned against my shoulder. "Can I say something though? Of course. I don't think I was ever the problem. I think they were just scared of people who didn't fit the picture." I didn't answer right away. I just held her tighter, because she wasn't wrong. That was the thing about Evelyn, about all of them. They needed everything to look a certain way, and Lily, she saw too much, felt too deeply, existed too freely. You can't package that into a neat frame. You can't name it on a seating chart and contain it with a ribbon. That kind of spirit makes people like Evelyn nervous. But it also makes people like Lily impossible to erase. A few days after the funeral, James got a letter, not an email. A real letter, delivered by hand. It was from Evelyn's estate attorney. He brought it to me unopened. "You first," he said. I opened it carefully, half expecting another passive-aggressive parting gift or a final attempt at control. But it wasn't that. Not exactly. It was short. A single paragraph. "To James and Monica Blake, I have revised the terms of my estate. I've done what I should have done long ago. I won't be around to explain it, but you'll understand soon enough. And if you choose not to accept it, I'll understand that too." Attached was a legal document. James read it in silence. I watched the lines on his face shift slowly, like clouds clearing from behind glass. She'd left something large. Something unexpected, not just to him, to Lily. A foundation, a scholarship fund, in her name, the Lily Blake Initiative. I read the title 3 times before I believed it. I sat down, suddenly too still. "She changed it." James nodded. "All of it." I looked at him, waiting for anger, disbelief, something. But he just let out a quiet breath. "Maybe she knew," he said. "Maybe she saw it all a little too late. Or maybe this was her way of asking to be remembered differently." We didn't respond to the attorney. We didn't make a statement. We didn't attend the formal reading. But we accepted the gift. Not because we needed her money, we didn't, but because we knew how many little girls like Lily existed. Smart, overlooked, quietly erased in rooms where the rules were written before they were born. And if a piece of Evelyn's legacy could be used to rewrite that for someone else, then maybe it was worth it. Maybe redemption doesn't come in words. Maybe it comes in what you choose to leave behind, and what you choose never to repeat. The official launch of the Lily Blake Initiative happened almost a year later. Quietly, intentionally. Not in a grand ballroom or country club lounge like Evelyn would have insisted, but in the auditorium of Lily's school. Wood floors, folding chairs, parents with coffee cups and tired eyes. No champagne, no velvet ropes, just kids, their drawings taped to the walls, their names scribbled in crooked Sharpie on homemade name tags. That was how it should have always been. That was where real change belonged. We didn't make a big speech. James said a few words, Lily said a few more. She stood behind the podium, knees wobbling a little, but voice steady, and told the room what it felt like to not be picked, to not be seen, and then she smiled and said, "But now I know you don't have to wait for someone to choose you. You can choose yourself, and then choose other people too. That's what this is about." I don't think there was a dry eye in the room. A teacher grabbed my hand. Another woman whispered, "You have no idea how many kids needed to hear that." But I did. I knew, because I used to be one of them. And so had James in his own way. And now Lily. Lily was the first in our line to break that pattern out loud. After the event, there were handshakes and thank yous and people offering help. A few reporters asked questions. We kept our answers short. We weren't doing it for headlines. We were doing it for the girl who once sat at a table full of velvet boxes and saw none with her name. So no one else would have to feel that again. Months passed, Lily turned 12. She didn't ask for a party. She asked if we could take a road trip, somewhere where no one knows who we are, she said. And I smiled because I understood exactly what she meant. We packed up the car, drove up the coast, stopped at little roadside diners, and slept in motels with creaky beds and soda machines in the lobby. She kept a journal the whole time. On the last night, she showed it to me. It's not done. She said, "But I want you to read this page." I took it carefully. On the paper, in her slightly slanted handwriting, she'd written, "When you're not invited, it's not always because you don't belong. Sometimes it's because you're meant to build a table somewhere else, one that doesn't need a head seat, just room." I read it twice, then again, and all I could do was hug her, long and quiet, the way I used to when she was small and didn't understand why the cousins got birthday cards and she didn't. Only now she wasn't small. She was more. I didn't need revenge. Not in the way people think of it, dramatic, explosive, public. I just needed something Evelyn never gave me, and something she'd almost managed to steal from my daughter too, clarity. That was my justice. That was my win. We never got another letter from the family, not a call, not an apology, but we did get stories. Emails from women who'd read about the initiative, who'd heard Lily's speech, who'd started their own funds, their own community circles, their own promises to never let a child in their lives go unseen again. It rippled, quietly but deeply, like something strong enough to outlast bloodlines. That's what Evelyn never understood. Legacy isn't built in bank accounts or velvet chairs. It's in the echo your choices leave behind. And we were just getting started. Summer came in slow and golden that year. Everything felt softer, like the world had unclenched just a little, like we were finally breathing air we didn't have to ask permission for. James started taking weekends off. That might not sound like a big deal to most people, but for a man raised to believe productivity was proof of worth, it was monumental. He started gardening. At first, he was terrible at it. He overwatered the basil and forgot to prune the tomatoes, but he was out there every morning, barefoot in the dewy grass, laughing at himself. I watched from the kitchen window, coffee in hand, and realized that for the first time in our entire marriage, we weren't surviving something. We were just living. Lily started volunteering at the community library on Saturdays. She shelved books, helped with craft sessions for younger kids, and organized the poetry corner. One afternoon, I picked her up, and the librarian handed me a tiny stapled booklet. "She made this," she whispered, like it was a secret. On the cover was a drawing of a dinner table with one chair turned away from the rest. The title read, "The Chair They Forgot." Inside were short poems, quiet ones, sharp ones. One said, "I didn't need your name on a box. I needed your eyes on me. You looked past, I looked forward. I didn't cry until I got to the last page. It was just 3 lines. She smiled anyway. She said it was okay, but I remember everything. I hugged her that night longer than usual. Told her how proud I was. She just shrugged like it was no big deal. But I knew. She'd turned pain into pages. That was something Evelyn never could have imagined. That fall, I was invited to speak at a women's mentorship event. Nothing big. Just a local gathering of entrepreneurs and community organizers. I almost said no, my voice still shook sometimes when I spoke to crowds. But James said something that stuck. "You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be real." So I went. I told them about the velvet boxes, the empty chair, the card under the plate. I didn't name names. I didn't have to. I saw the way women's eyes welled up as I spoke. The way they nodded slowly, like someone was finally saying aloud what they'd buried under years of smiles and makeup and diplomacy. Afterward, one woman came up to me, older, maybe in her late 60s, and took my hand. "You gave her a voice," she said. "That little girl of yours. But maybe more than that, you gave yourself one too." I drove home in silence, replaying her words. And I realized she was right. For so long, I'd lived in the background. The wife, the mom, the one who kept the peace. And somewhere in that role, I forgot I had a name too. But not anymore. The initiative grew, slowly, organically, like a tree that doesn't care how tall it gets, just that it keeps reaching. A school in Oregon asked to replicate the model. Then another in Arizona. A woman in New York City funded a sister program in her daughter's name. We got letters, photos, stories. A teenager in Texas who stood up to a stepmother who always left her out of family events. A grandmother in Ohio who rewrote her will after hearing Lily's poem. The world was listening, not because we shouted, but because we whispered something that had been buried for too long. We didn't talk about Evelyn anymore. Not because we forgot, but because she was no longer the center of the story. She'd become a footnote, a cause that led to a cure. And that, I think, is the real revenge. Not proving proving someone wrong, but proving someone irrelevant. We didn't chase a seat at her table anymore. We built our own, and somehow ours always had one more chair, just in case someone like Lily showed up, quiet, unsure, wondering if they mattered. We'd slide the chair out, hand them a plate, and say, "We've been waiting for you." The following spring, Lily stood in front of her entire middle school class and recited one of her poems at the year-end assembly. No podium, no script, just her voice, and a gymnasium full of teenagers and parents who had no idea that a 12-year-old could hold a room so still it felt like the air was waiting for permission to move. She wore her favorite blue sweater, the one she said made her feel not pretty, not cool, just like me. She didn't shake, not once. Her voice was steady and calm, not loud but clear, like she wasn't asking to be heard but simply assuming she would be. That shift. It was everything. She read, "They taught me that silence is polite, but I am not furniture, I am not wallpaper, I am not something you forget to bring into the photo. I am the flash, I am the frame." When she finished, no one clapped right away. Not because they didn't want to, but because they couldn't. It was like she'd reached inside every person in that gym and held their chest still for a moment. Then the applause came. And it didn't stop. I stood in the back near the bleachers holding onto the railing and felt something break open in me. Not pain, not grief, not even pride, it was recognition. For the first time in my life, I saw the world respond to my daughter the way I'd always seen her. And I thought, this is what healing looks like. Not erasing the past, not pretending it didn't happen, but making something beautiful from the space it left behind. James wrapped his arm around my waist. "She's better than all of them," he said quietly. I nodded, eyes still fixed on her. She always was. That summer, we hosted the first official retreat for the initiative. 10 girls, 10 stories, all different, all familiar. Some had been adopted and treated like accessories. Some were stepchildren who'd never had a bedroom that felt like theirs. Some were biological daughters who still somehow ended up on the outside of every joke, every photo, every memory. And all of them had one thing in common. They were tired of being quiet. We didn't call it therapy. We didn't call it healing, we just called it what it was: space, room to exist, room to speak without explaining. The first night we sat around a fire pit, no counselors, no lectures, just blankets and toasted marshmallows and the crackle of wood splitting into embers. One girl, tall, with a buzzcut and sleeves pulled over her fists, said, "I don't know what it's like to feel chosen. I only know what it's like to feel kept." That sentence hung in the air. We didn't rush to comfort her. No one tried to correct it. We just let it breathe. And then Lily, without looking up, said, "You don't need to be chosen to start choosing. You can start with you." A few of the girls cried. So did I, not because it was sad, because it was brave. That's what Evelyn never understood. Love doesn't come from hierarchy. It doesn't drip down from the top of a family tree like syrup over pancakes. It rises from the small moments, the defiance of choosing yourself, the stubbornness of saying, "You don't get to decide my worth anymore." By fall, the Lily Blake Initiative had over 30 partner schools. We hired our first full-time coordinator. James helped set up a donor matching system. And Lily, she started writing her first book. She called it The Invisible Chair. It wasn't finished. She said she didn't want to rush it, that she'd know when it was done. One evening, while she was sketching illustrations for the pages, she turned to me and said, "Do you think Grandma ever really saw me?" I paused. Not because I didn't have an answer, but because I wanted to give her the right one. "I think she saw you," I said softly, "but she didn't understand you. And sometimes people punish what they can't understand." Lily nodded, thoughtful. "Then I'm glad she didn't get the last word." Neither did I, not really. The last word belonged to Lily, and through her, to every girl who ever sat at a table and wondered what they did wrong. Whoever watched someone hand out love like it was a limited resource. Whoever smiled and said, "It's okay," when they were anything but. That was the real legacy. Not Evelyn's estate, not the rewritten trust, not the velvet boxes or the attorney letters. But this, a generation of girls who wouldn't ask to belong. They'd just belong anyway, who wouldn't chase seats. They'd build tables. And at every one of those tables, they'd leave one extra chair, just in case someone like them showed up. And they'd look that girl in the eye and say, "You don't have to be quiet here. We saved you a place." That winter, the initiative was invited to speak at a regional education conference. Not some feel-good, niche event, but a real one. Policymakers, superintendents, principals with starched suits and agendas stapled 12 pages deep. I was asked to lead a panel. Me, Monica Blake, who once thought keeping her head down was the best way to keep her family from unraveling, who used to believe that silence was strength and accommodation was love. I almost said no. I sat with the email in my drafts for 2 full days. And then Lily walked in from school, dumped her backpack, and asked, "If you do the talk, can I come with you?" That's what did it. I hit send. We drove down 2 weeks later, just the two of us. James stayed behind to run a workshop for new initiative mentors, and got a tiny room at a hotel that smelled like old coffee and cleaning spray. We didn't care. We stayed up late rehearsing what I'd say. Lily curled at the foot of the bed, correcting my tone. "Don't apologize so much," she told me. "You didn't do anything wrong by speaking." The next morning, I stood in front of 100 people who made decisions about what children should learn and how they should feel. I told them about a little girl who smiled at an empty place setting, about the note under her plate, about the trust fund. I didn't name names. I didn't shame them. I just told the truth. And then I paused, looked out at the room, and said, "You can measure academic success all you want. But if a child doesn't feel seen, they are learning how to disappear. And they will carry that lesson longer than any math score." When I stepped down, a woman approached me with tears already sliding down her cheeks. "My daughter," she whispered. "We don't talk anymore. But I remember now. I remember everything she said, and I didn't listen. I thought she was exaggerating, overreacting." I placed a hand gently on her arm. "You still have time to say, 'I believe you now.'" She nodded. Lily watched it all from the back of the room, her legs swinging under her seat, a soft, proud grin tugging at the side of her face. On the drive home, she turned to me and said, "I think it's wild how everything changed because of one birthday dinner." I smiled. "It wasn't the dinner, baby. It was you. It was always you." When spring came, something unexpected happened. One of Evelyn's oldest friends, a woman named Margot I'd only met twice, sent us a letter. Handwritten, ink smudged in the corners, as if she'd cried while writing it. She said she'd followed the initiative quietly for months. She said she'd seen what Lily had done, not just in action, but in posture, in spirit. She included a photograph, old and slightly bent. Evelyn, more than 20, standing with a small child on her hip. The child didn't look like James or Susan or anyone I knew. On the back, a note. Her name was Liza. Evelyn's cousin's child. She stayed with them for 2 years after her mother died. Then suddenly, she was gone. Never mentioned again. My hands trembled holding that photo. I showed it to James. He stared at it for a long time. "She had her own invisible chair," he said. "Long before ours." That changed something for me. Not in a way that excused it, but in a way that explained it. Pain, when unspoken, mutates. It becomes legacy. Sometimes the cruelty we face didn't start with us, but ending it, that's still our responsibility. Lily put the photo in the back of her journal. She didn't ask questions. She just said, "Then I'll write for her too." That summer, she finished her book. The Invisible Chair was published by a small press. Not flashy, just honest. It sold out in 3 weeks. Bookstores requested reprints. Teachers asked for classroom editions. Girls, and more than a few grown women, sent letters. One said, "I didn't even know I was still waiting to be picked, until I read your book, and realized I don't have to anymore." Lily framed that one, hung it above her desk. And every time I passed it, I thought, this isn't just healing. It's revolution. Quiet, unapologetic, and unstoppable. By the time fall rolled around, Lily had been invited to speak at 3 schools and 1 youth leadership summit. She was 13 now, but most people mistook her for older. Not because of her height or the way she dressed, but because of how she held herself. She walked into rooms like she already belonged in them. She didn't shrink. She didn't wait to be introduced. She spoke with clarity and calm, never chasing applause, but always leaving silence in her wake. The kind of silence that follows truth, not uncertainty. The youth summit was held in Chicago. It was the biggest venue yet, an old theater converted into a lecture hall. Red velvet seats, gilded lights still flickering from their century-old sockets. We sat in the back while the MC read her introduction. She looked nervous, her fingers twisted in her lap. I leaned down and whispered, "You don't have to prove anything. Just tell your story." She nodded, stood up, and walked down that long aisle like the stage was just another sidewalk she'd been down 100 times. She didn't use notes, just looked at the crowd and said, "My name is Lily Blake, and when I was 11, I realized that not being seen can hurt more than being yelled at. It makes you question if you're really there. But I also learned you can build something from that hurt. You can plant it, and watch it grow into something no one can ignore again." The audience was silent, not bored, reverent. I watched teachers look at one another with raised eyebrows, students lean forward, organizers pause their phones mid-recording. She told them about the card, the trust, the empty chair. She said, they thought the worst part was forgetting me. It wasn't. The worst part was watching my mom stay quiet because she thought that was safer. But now, she doesn't stay quiet anymore. Neither do I. By the end, 3 girls were crying. One boy asked for the mic during cue. I've never told anyone this, but I feel like the invisible kid at home too. Like if I disappeared, no one would notice. Lily didn't hesitate. She walked off the stage, handed him her book, and said, I would notice. That moment went viral. Not in a flashy way. No trending hashtag, no splashy headline. Just a clip, filmed on someone's phone, uploaded quietly with the caption, This girl changed everything for my son. It was viewed 5 million times in a month. We got calls from press. We declined. The initiative wasn't about spotlight, it was about roots, the kind that grow underground, stretch between stories and scars, and bind people together long before they realized they were never alone. At home, Lily was still just Lily. She still left toast crumbs on the counter and forgot to bring in her laundry. She still rolled her eyes when James tried to help with her algebra homework and stayed up past midnight reading novels that made her sob into a pillow. But there was something deeper in her now, a groundedness. A knowing. One night, after she'd gone to bed, I found her journal open on her desk. I never read her private pages, not once. But this one wasn't hidden. It was left like she wanted me to see it. There were just 6 lines on the page. They said the chair wasn't mine, so I stood. Then I built a new table. Then I found others who had been standing too. Then we sat down together, and the world got quieter. But we didn't. I closed the journal and sat on her bed. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. I just breathed. Deep, full breaths, the kind I hadn't known how to take when this all began, because somewhere along the way, what started as a wound had become a doorway. And my daughter, the girl they once looked past, had walked through it and lit the way for others. And me, I followed. Not behind her, beside her. At a table with no headseat, no conditions, no velvet boxes. Just room, always room. That winter, we hosted our biggest event yet, a gathering of over 100 girls and young women from across the country. Flown in, driven in, some chaperoned by mentors, others by moms who whispered to me in hallways, I wish something like this had existed when I was her age. We held it in a repurposed school gym in upstate New York. No stage, no flashy decor, just strings of lights, thick blankets, mismatched cushions, folding chairs arranged in wide, open circles. We didn't want it to feel like a conference. We wanted it to feel like coming home. And for many of those girls, it was the first time they'd felt anything close to that. Lily helped plan every detail. From the welcome kits to the breakout circles, she insisted on handwritten name tags instead of printed ones. If you write your own name, she told me, you're telling the room who you are. No one else gets to define that for you. She was 13 going on forever. Some of the older girls kept asking her what grade she was in, like they couldn't quite believe someone so young had built something so big. She just smiled and said, I'm just getting started. On the final night, we lit a bonfire behind the gym. Snow flurried in tiny spirals, catching in our hair, melting on our scarves. Each girl was handed a small slip of paper. They were told, write down one sentence someone made you believe about yourself that hurt. Fold it once. Toss it in the fire. Let the heat have it. Then write a new sentence, the truth. What you believe about yourself now. Read it out loud. It was quiet at first, hesitant. The first few girls read in whispers. I'm not weak. I deserve to take up space. I don't have to be grateful just because someone stayed. But then came the wave, brave, rising voices filling the snowy air. I am not too much. I am not hard to love. I am not broken. They just didn't try hard enough to understand me. When it was Lily's turn, she stood in the center of the circle, held her paper like a matchstick, and said, they told me I was being dramatic, that I imagined the empty chair, that I should just be grateful I was invited. But here's the truth. I saw everything, and I still chose kindness. That doesn't make me weak. That makes me dangerous to people who hide behind tradition. And then she smiled, folded the old lie, dropped it into the fire. I stood behind her, watching the flames twist and spit little pieces of ash into the dark. I'd never seen anything like it. Not just the ritual, the release, the rewriting, the hundreds of small, invisible chairs being unbuilt in real time, no longer needed. Later that night, after the fire had died and most of the girls had gone inside for cocoa and soft music, I found Lily standing by herself at the edge of the woods. Cold out here, I said. She nodded, arms wrapped around herself. I just wanted to remember this, how it feels. I stood beside her. How does it feel? She looked up at the sky, like I took something that almost broke me and turned it into a map, and now people are following it, even if they don't know my name. That's kind of wild, right? I smiled. That's what leaders do, baby. They leave light behind. She didn't say anything after that. Just leaned into me, and we stood there together, listening to the snow touch the earth. I don't know what Evelyn would have thought if she'd lived to see that night. Maybe she would have refused to come. Maybe she would have scoffed at the paper slips and candles. Maybe she would have stood in the corner with her pearls and cold eyes, insisting that none of it was necessary. But maybe, just maybe, she would have felt the warmth of a fire started by the very girl she once overlooked, and understood. In that final moment, that legacy isn't built by what you own. It's built by what you free. The following year unfolded like the kind of quiet victory no one sees coming until it's already bloomed. Lily's book was picked up by a larger publishing house, translated into 3 languages, and added to middle school reading lists across the country. We started getting letters from places we'd never been: Turkey, Brazil, a small town in northern France, handwritten notes in broken English from girls who said they never knew anyone else had felt like them. One letter from a 14-year-old named Soraya simply read, "I thought the empty chair was just mine. Now I know it was theirs to fill, not mine to earn." Lily read that one out loud and pinned it on her bedroom wall. She didn't say anything after, just stood there looking at it like it was a reflection. That summer, she was invited to speak at a national youth forum in D.C., but instead of standing on the big stage under spotlights and cameras, she asked to hold her session on the lawn, barefoot, in a circle, without microphones. She told the organizers, "The louder the world gets, the more you miss the whispers that matter." They agreed. She sat on the grass with a group of girls from all over the country, and she asked them one question: "What did they try to take from you that you're taking back?" The answers came slowly at first, then faster, until it became a rhythm: my voice, my seat at the table, my joy when no one was looking, my name before they shortened it to fit what made them comfortable. A girl from Louisiana said, "They took my story, but not my words," and Lily reached out and took her hand. I watched from across the field with tears in my throat. She wasn't my little girl anymore. She was something bigger, not untouchable, but whole. And nothing Evelyn had done, not the years of exclusion, not the withheld affection, not the silence, could touch that now. Because this was the moment she'd been building toward, not for revenge, but for release. We no longer talked about Evelyn. Her name rarely came up. Not because we erased her, but because she'd become irrelevant to the world Lily was shaping. The initiative had grown into something far beyond what any of us imagined. Community chapters in over 30 cities, partnerships with school districts, mentorship programs, even a podcast where girls read letters to their younger selves. Lily refused to host it. She said it wasn't supposed to be about her. "Let other girls lead," she said. "It's their turn to be the loudest voice in the room." She was right, and I followed her lead. I stepped back from daily operations and started working one-on-one with mothers. Mothers like me, who'd once sat silently at family tables and told themselves their daughters would be fine, even when they weren't. We held kitchen table circles. No titles, no panels, just women finally saying out loud the things they'd buried for decades, that they still remembered the cousin who got more attention, the birthday that was skipped, the moment they realized their worth was conditional. We didn't fix everything, but we said the truth. And sometimes that's all it takes to start again. One evening, while we were walking home from the neighborhood park, Lily reached for my hand, something she hadn't done in years. She was taller now, her grip stronger, but it still fit perfectly inside mine. She looked up and said, "Do you think I'll ever forget the dinner?" I didn't answer right away. I watched the leaves shift in the trees above us and said, "Number, but I don't think you're supposed to." She nodded. "Me neither. I think that night is part of my spine now. Not because of what they did, but because of what we didn't let it do to us." And there it was, not closure, not forgiveness, just clarity, that what was meant to silence her had become her anthem, that what had tried to make her small had made her a mirror for others, and that somewhere in the ashes of the old dining room, and the velvet boxes and the polished silver that never held her name, she had built a fire that warmed hundreds, maybe thousands, maybe more. And that fire was never going out. It's been 3 years since that dinner. The one where my daughter's name wasn't on the box. The one where I finally realized that silence, even when done politely, is still betrayal. 3 years since I watched my 11-year-old lift her chin, read a card aloud, and level a room full of adults who had never once made space for her. 3 years since James stood beside her, not behind her, and finally said, "Enough." 3 years since I stopped folding myself into someone else's shape just to be allowed at their table. Today, Lily is 15. She's halfway through writing her second book. She told me last week, "This one's not about them. This one's about what comes after." And I understood that better than I thought I would. Because there is something after. After the heartbreak, after the burn, after the realization that the people you spent years trying to please never really saw you to begin with, we still have that velvet box. The one that was placed beside Lily's plate the second time, after they realized the optics. We never opened it. It sits in the back of my closet in a Ziploc bag, not because it's precious, but because it's proof of how hard they tried to pretend, of how little it meant once the truth was spoken. I've stopped trying to understand Evelyn. I don't need to. She made her choices. She built her legacy, but I built mine too, not from wealth. Not from inheritance, from witness, from remembering, from refusing to let one child's quiet erasure go unanswered. People still ask if I regret it, if I regret walking away, if I regret burning that bridge so publicly, so completely. And I always answer the same way: I don't regret it. I regret not doing it sooner. Because if I had, maybe my daughter wouldn't have had to read a card at a table full of people who never intended to hear her. Maybe she would have known from the start that her name didn't have to be given a place, it already was the place. So no, I don't regret a thing, not the trust, not the letter, not the fire. Because every time I see Lily speak, every time a new girl walks into a room and doesn't lower her eyes, every time a mother like me decides she's done staying quiet, I remember what Evelyn never could. Sometimes the loudest legacy isn't what you leave behind, it's what you refuse to carry forward. And that's the kind of inheritance my daughter will never have to earn. It's already hers.